From Chicago's CAN TV, this is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there, and welcome to Chicago Newsroom, and this our third installment of Meet the Future Mayor, as we attempt to talk in depth with all of the announced candidates who want to be mayor when that inaugural day rolls around in 2019. Today, the guy who's polling in second place, at least he was about 2 months ago when Jason McGrath took the poll, and it's the most recent one that I've seen, so let's just run with it, second place. In Bill Ruthart's Tribune poll, we learned that our guest today was among the first NYPD brass to arrive at the World Trade Center on 9/11, that he trundled the mayor of New York into the lobby of a neighboring building where they attempted to set up a temporary command center. And then when the towers began to collapse, the debris started falling on their command center, so they had to get out of there, and they did fortunately escape with their lives. He's been 3 decades policing in New York, Newark, and here in Chicago, where he was Rahm Emanuel's hand-picked police chief during the first 5 years of the administration of Rahm Emanuel. And as we all know, Emanuel fired him at the end of 2015 as the LaQuan McDonald shooting reaction began to boil over, calling his superintendent a distraction. It's my great pleasure to welcome to our table today Garry McCarthy, who is candidate for the mayor of the city of Chicago. Nice
Thanks,
to have
Ken.
you here.
Nice
Glad to
introduction. Thank you.
I wanted to get right into the fact that you have a long experience with policing and with urban areas, and
Right.
you were at the certainly the worst urban incident of our lifetimes, and I think that is something that begins to fold into one's character. So anyway, polling. What's your most recent polling data? Is that 2-month-old thing? Are you still looking at being in second place?
Actually, I'm really glad you asked that question because Lori Lightfoot released her poll recently, which came right after Rahm Emanuel released a poll. And obviously we did our own polling. So 3 separate polls put me solidly in second place, mine, the mayor's, and Lori Lightfoot's, which is a real positive because nobody expects with this many candidates that we're not going to a runoff. So being in second place puts you into the runoff, and the other numbers that are in those polls kind of support the fact that with the negatives that the mayor has, he has a real problem. So that's very encouraging. It's uplifting. And it's actually a little bit of fun. It's a bit of a grind doing this. As I like to point out, I'm not a politician, I'm a public servant. I've been a public servant for 35 years. As a matter of fact, last week would have been my 37th anniversary as a police officer, July of 1981. And I get a lot of juice, if you will, from doing public service. I didn't really choose to do this. It kind of got pushed on me by a number of people over the course of the last 2 years, believe it or not. And finally I accepted it, and here we go. It's different. Let's put it this way. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
You are the guy with the name recognition. I mean, among the 9. But also, speaking of the 9, all 9 of you all put together don't have as much money as the mayor has. So I know everybody says the same thing, that, well, the money doesn't really matter once you begin to get your message out there. But it's a tough road when the mayor's got millions and millions and he's got people standing by to throw millions more at him.
No, absolutely. And the money does matter, but I don't think it's the one and only thing that matters. Third-time incumbent candidates are judged almost exclusively on their track record, which in this case is abysmal. I like to say that the only thing that's gotten better in the city over the last 7 years is the Cubs, and the mayor will take credit for that also. But at the end of the day...
Well, he built the stadium for them, so... Yeah.
I like to give Theo Epstein and Tom Ricketts a lot of credit.
Oh, okay, yeah, they had something to do with it too, didn't they?
Yeah. But the bottom line is, I'm the only candidate who's rolling out policies. Last month we talked about ethics and transparency and fundamental fairness in government. Stop the lying, stop the politics, and let's start running city government like a business. This month just happens to be Crime Month, and I laid out a very specific plan. I think it was about 13 or 14 points of how to reduce crime in the city, which is not being adhered to right now. It's the plan that we put in place that got us to 50-year lows in the murder rate. which has been abandoned. And the political landscape that's been created in this city has put us in the position that we're in right now, which is, in my book, we're reaching lawlessness. And that's not okay. We can't say that any place in this city is safe. I live in a nice neighborhood in River North, and I've been woken up by gunshots in the middle of the night 3 times in a 6-week period. There's carjackings and shootings on Lakeshore Drive, shootings in Water Tower Place, Lincoln Park, robberies are through the roof, carjackings. A woman, now this was in North Lawndale, I believe, on Sunday, 59-year-old woman going to church, got murdered during a carjacking. This is just beyond anything that I've seen in my life. And I was in New York City when we had 2,245 people murdered. Now I want you to realize that that city last year had 290 murders in a city 3 times the size of Chicago, that in 2016 had 770.
Okay,
unacceptable.
We're moving too fast. I want to back up, and I want to deal with these things like one step at a time here, because
whatever you want.
All of these are important points, but I don't want it to just flow by like a river, a river of facts.
I'm used to having to speak fast.
Yeah, I know. This is the difference with Chicago Newsroom. We just sit back and talk.
Okay.
You called yourself and have referred to yourself recently as a conservative Democrat. And I'm not sure that I have any concept of what a conservative Democrat is or was. What kind of conservative Democrat are you?
So, as I try to explain to people, in I guess it was 1977 when I was first eligible to vote, in New York City, the Democrats represented the blue-collar working class, electricians, plumbers, policemen, firemen, so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. I think that the party in general has swung way to the left. And I think that by holding true to those tenets that I was raised with, as I told you, my parents were that greatest generation. My mom was a nurse. My dad was a police officer and a World War II Marine. By holding true to those tenets that we grew up with, I've now become a conservative Democrat based upon where the rest of the party has gone.
But still a Democrat.
Absolutely.
So you didn't make that extra step, that extra leap into the Republican Party to become Trumpian.
No, absolutely not.
So one of the things that I find...
Wait, what is Trumpian?
Well, I don't know.
I don't want to know.
I have absolutely no idea. But that has been, I think when we look at Ohio and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, and we see what happened there, we're seeing that a lot of the very same people you were talking about made that leap to Trump. But sticking with this for just a little bit longer, Wet Moser had a very interesting comment about you in Chicago Magazine in the last couple of days. You may have seen it, where he said that the Garry McCarthy platform is kind of a bungalow belt strategy. It's like a classic Chicago bungalow belt strategy of lower taxes and more responsibility and so on and so forth, except that he's also talking about reallocating resources, which is about as far as you can get from the bungalow belt. The quote that's attributed to you is the following. Reading back, you say, the formula we're using right now, this is for schools, is not equitable. That's the bottom line. The resources need to go where they're needed most, okay? People don't want to hear that, I know, but people don't want to hear we might be moving money from one place to another, just like nobody wants to move their police officers, as I learned very early in Chicago. So you're talking to conservative Democrats who live in perhaps those bungalow belts on the north and south side and so forth, and you're saying you might have to give something up so that we can move some of these resources into the communities that need them more.
Actually, I'm not saying that, Ken. And this is something, I try to pay attention. And one of the things I always say is that I can only control what I say, not what people hear.
Right.
Right. And in this case, what I'm talking about are things like TIF funding, which is not being applied to the schools. It's being doled out as political favors to aldermen to try and get their political support.
Yeah.
Now, if that money goes to where it's supposed to go, we don't have to take anything from any place else. We can support the South and the West Side with what's there. So that's just
so
an
you're
example.
not talking about reducing funding to schools out in Edison Park or something, or taking away their police or something.
No, absolutely not. But what we do have to do is look at the formulas that got us to this place and figure out where the rest of that money has gone. One of the things that I speak about frequently and I just want to be clear on this because I think I surprised a lot of people when I said I would not spend $95 million on a new police academy.
You surprised me. I'll grant you that.
Well,
yeah.
first of all, it's not $95 million.
No,
Because
as
this
said,
is
it's
Chicago,
$180 million.
and nothing gets done on time and on budget. So let's just start from that. That's not okay, by the way, but it seems to be an acceptable practice here. We will get things done on time and on budget because it's really important. But that police academy that we actually have is certainly adequate for what we need. If we want to expand our training opportunities, there's plenty of other properties in the city that we can acquire really cheaply and rehab them for God knows how much less money if we want to set up what is referred to in some departments as a fun house, a tactical place where you go and you have to make an entry and you're going through the house looking for somebody. Those are very important training opportunities that we could do in other places in the city.
I'm really intrigued by that. I told you a little bit beforehand that I worked for some time for the city of Chicago, and one of my jobs was running the television operations for the city. We spent a lot of time with the fire department shooting videos of their training in some of the high rises before they were knocked down.
Right.
The fire department took control of several of them, and I don't think I've ever been more freaked out in my life than watching things like watching a room full of normal furniture and how fast it'll get up to 800 degrees and that kind of thing. That kind of training.
And not being able to see your hand in front of your face.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's something about bringing people in and training them in a real building under what's as close to the reality as you're ever going to get.
Right.
That is better than something simulated in a training facility that's kind of, that's set up for that. So I'm intrigued by that. I think that's a really interesting idea. And there, as you say, there are plenty of places that can be used for that.
And we could do it cheaper. And we don't need a campus for public safety training. It can be throughout the city in different places.
Yeah.
And we could do it cheaper and better. This is a political shiny object for the mayor to point to and say, I'm all about police reform. And I think it's nonsense.
Did you disagree with the DOJ report and the police accountability report? That, I mean, they didn't spend a lot of time talking about training, but there were criticisms of the training that the Chicago police received, and a lot of it was during your tenure.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm actually on record with this. The Tribune editorial board, right after that DOJ report came out, asked me to come down and talk to them, and I went down and spent an hour and a half, and he did a nice job issuing a 10-point rebuttal, if you will, to all the things why I had a problem with the DOJ report. But here's the thing about training that I simply do not understand. We not only met, but we exceeded the Illinois State Training Board's requirements for police departments. So if there was a problem with our training, the whole state of Illinois has a problem. I didn't hear that said. This was, I mean, we could probably take up the whole show if you wanted to talk about the DOJ report and all the problems
We've
with
done it here.
But I'm asking you to go back and take a look at what I said about the DOJ report back then. And first of all, I wasn't interviewed. If you're going to investigate the policies and practices of a police department, I would certainly start with the person who implemented and created them, and that was never done.
When was the interrogation stuff done for that? It was released in
interrogation. It's funny that you said that.
Well, whatever. the interviewing, let's say. I think the reports were released in 17, weren't they?
January of 17.
Yeah, and so you were already gone for a year. You were gone for a year.
Right.
Yeah.
Like 14 months.
Yeah.
But I really was aghast when I saw the Attorney General of the United States, Loretta Lynch, on international TV say that a reporter asked her, why didn't you interview Garry McCarthy? And she said, we tried to get in touch with Mr. McCarthy, but he was unavailable. And my response, when naturally my phone blew up, because I think every reporter in the city has my phone number. You probably will by the end of the day. And my phone blew up, and my response was simple. With all the investigative resources of the federal government, you couldn't find me here in River North. So they didn't want to interview me. They came to town with a blueprint. If you read every one of the, I believe it was 28 investigations that were done over that 8-year period, they all read exactly the same. So before they came
You've
out
said
with the
that
report,
there's like a lot of sort of cut and paste paragraphs.
they
that are
have
almost
they
identical.
have a blueprint. They come to town and they take testimony and they say, "Aha, I knew it." That's not the way you do an investigation. You do an investigation by starting out neutral and gaining facts and coming to a conclusion.
One of the things that I have just been dying to talk to you about for so long is the question of training, though, and the Chicago police. We've had so many incidents, as you know better than anybody, where things have gone awry, and the narrative has been that this is an issue of police officers not being properly or adequately or frequently enough trained. Do you believe that?
I believe it's a combination of training and supervision. You can train officers till the cows come home, but if you don't have supervision that's implementing what you got trained on, then it's going to fail. So let me just tell you a couple of things about that. First of all, while I was superintendent, we implemented another training cycle. We only had one at the time. We implemented a second one. Every year, the officers would go twice a year for firearms qualification and training. So that's where we started. The second thing is we created a training program on something called police legitimacy, where every officer and supervisor in the department went for a one-day training on police legitimacy, and the training course was created by Tracy Mears and Tom Tyler, both Yale University professors now, who actually created the concepts of police legitimacy. And it was viewed as the national standard for what should be happening in police training. People were coming here from all over the country. The thing that I got a kick out of more than anything else in the DOJ report was, while they came and they excoriated the department, which is what they did, that same Department of Justice hired as a paid consultant my right-hand chief, Bob Tracy, who's now the chief in Wilmington, Delaware, who was the chief of crime control strategies, which is a position that doesn't exist anymore in the department, to go and
Chicago.
show. Yeah. I created it to mirror the position that I had in the NYPD the last 7 years I was there. The position was eliminated, but DOJ hired Bob Tracy, the same DOJ that was investigating the department, to go to other police departments and consult on what they should be doing. What type of silliness is that? It's one or the other.
Yeah.
We can't have it both ways. We were being held up to the country as the Chicago plan was modern day policing. The President's Task Force, 21st Century Task Force on Policing, issued a report that basically made recommendations for 92% of the things that we were already doing. And the other 8% we couldn't do because of Illinois state law or contractual obligation. We were held as the gold standard in policing, and suddenly we were the worst in the country. It can't be both ways, Ken.
The issue, though, seems to be, and let me just stop all of this for just a moment and say, before we went on the air, I said there would be a great incentive here, a tendency to want to just sit and talk about LaQuan McDonald and all of the, these other controversial issues. I really want to talk to you as a guy who's running for mayor, and I want not to get distracted by those things, but I can't help it. I'm a human being, and I'm sitting here, and I've been following this all my life.
They're big issues,
and they are huge issues, and
right.
And it would be impossible to make a decision about whether to pull the lever for you for mayor without having decided some of these things. So let's reserve some time that we can actually sort of reopen some of the LaQuan McDonald stuff and all that later in our conversation. But let's move on, shall we? Let's talk about
Following your lead,
you.
Ted.
You've got a three-part platform: CPS and education being one, taxes and the economy being another bucket, and then of course crime. Let's go through some of these.
Well, there's one more that is a fundamental thing. Those are the issues, but the way we address them. The business management of city government, performance-based government versus the politics that we're using today. That's critical. And cities who have done this have succeeded. Cities that don't are failing. It's night and day. You can see it across the country.
You are there's no question about the fact that you are a nationally recognized expert on crime and policing. But you're not when it comes to education and finance and all these things. So these are things that you have to come up to speed on very quickly. As far as the CPS, there are a bunch of things that we talk about here all the time, and I'm just going to throw them out at you in rapid succession, no particular order. One of the biggest criticisms about the current Chicago school system, CPS, is that it's too privatized, that under Mayor Emanuel it has become a haven for corporations to come in and do the cleaning and the engineering and everything else.
And failing all at the same time.
There's no question about that.
That's a scandal that should be front page.
Well, it has been.
But it should stay there,
Yeah.
along with the criminal sexual assaults.
Okay, so can I ask you then, would you back off on some of this just kind of, I would call it sort of simple-minded privatization, that privatization is the way to go?
Well, so let's make the distinction between private schools and privatization for cleaning. They're two totally separate concepts. I'm a fan of charter schools, but the problem with charter schools is that we're pushing out the people who need the education the most. And this is where our platform is really important. What happens outside the school affects what happens inside the school. And if a young man or young woman who's in high school is up all night because there was a crime scene outside their window, and if they're living in a single-parent household and maybe mom needs prescription prescription drugs to get through the day, and if she didn't have enough money to feed that young man or woman the next morning, and then they wake up and they have to cross 2 gang lines to get to school, he's not going to learn geometry at 9 a.m. because that's not his concern. So our platform has it to take the social services and actually put them right into the schools and make the schools a hub for the community. And two-tier treatment for not just the kid, but what's happening in the home. Now, government cannot create parenting, but we can create something called collective efficacy, which means that we can create the conditions so that young man or woman will succeed. We're not doing that right now. And you know, I compared what's happening on the southwest border to closing the schools and pulling the social services from the south and the west side. And where's the compassion? Where's the compassion? If you're sitting in an ivory tower dictating what's going to happen and not listening to what people need, if all you want to do is bring big corporations in downtown, we get cranes in the air downtown, while the neighborhoods are withering. So we need to bring back trade schools, because not everybody is going to succeed and go on to a college education. And by the way, if you get a B average, you could go to community college for free, and then you could drive a taxi cab. I mean, this is not a formula for success. We have to teach people to fish. We need electricians and carpenters and tradesmen. And then what we need to do is stop making small businesses shoulder the burden of taxes because we're giving breaks to companies like Amazon to come here. And they're not paying their fair share, but everybody else is getting increases all at the same time. We take those small businesses and we send them to the places where the trade schools are, and we create the market for jobs for those kids, so that we're losing our tax base because middle-class African Americans are leaving the city based upon taxes and gun violence from the south and the west side. They're going to places like Dallas, Fort Worth, and Houston. We're about to become the 5th largest city in the country, not the 3rd like we are today, because we've been losing population for 10 years. They're leaving because of gun violence. Because they're leaving, we don't have our tax base.
Well, more than just gun violence, but yeah, it is.
Taxes, gun violence, so on.
No jobs.
No jobs, right? No opportunity, no hope, right? Poor education system. So they're leaving. Because of that, we're losing our tax base. Because we're losing our tax base, we're closing schools and pulling social services from the south and the west side, which is causing more gun violence. These issues are all inexorably intertwined, and they can't be treated individually. There has to be a big picture plan. There's no plan here. Has there ever been a financial plan for the city of Chicago? I haven't heard of it in the 8 years that I've been here. 7.5. In the time that I've been here, I haven't heard of a financial plan. We have to create budgets and stick to them. We have to stop borrowing to pay our debt. Do you pay your Visa with your MasterCard? No, that's insanity. But that's what we're doing.
Yes, but I mean, I'm not in a situation where you know, the roof is leaking and everything in my life is completely screwed up, and I'm desperately looking for money, which is pretty much the situation that our government has been in for the last 10 years.
Well, we don't stick to budgets. If you're in that position and you don't stick to a budget, you're still going to fail.
I went to a hair-raising city club meeting with the then recently appointed budget director right after Rahm Emanuel was elected. And she laid out in some pretty stark terms what he inherited.
Right.
That he had a structural deficit of over, I think it was $700 million, that all of the pension plans were underwater. We had, you know, the parking deal, and just go on and on and on.
Remember, I just saved us $180 million.
How's that?
The police academy.
Oh, yeah.
And then let's talk
Well,
about the flyover,
you
which
saved
is another
100
62.
You saved 180 million that hadn't been spent yet, but yes, I understand. But nevertheless, I mean, I'm willing to give Rahm Emanuel some credit that he came in and used his financial skills to at least bring us back from the precipice.
We're not on the precipice?
Well, I would say financially we're a little bit better off than we were
The people who I
8
talked
years
to
ago.
claim that we're falling over.
Well, we might be, but
Yeah.
we were falling over. You know, this is a silly argument. It's a mess.
We're moving
We all
around
know
the
it's a
deck
mess.
chairs on a Titanic.
Well, that very well may be. And by the way, I know you've been on Ben Joravsky's show. Ben and I have argued about this for years. The flyover is a good idea. It's needed, and it will serve Chicago very well. And 20 years from now, when people are just using it every day, they would look back and say, I can't believe that wasn't always there. But that's a different argument.
$62 million. And no end in sight for a $30 million budgeted.
I'm only talking about whether it's needed or not. It's needed. But anyway, that's a
So is education and a reduction in gun violence.
So is absolutely right. But as mayor, you got to do everything, right? You got to keep the trains running too, and you got
to stop people from dying.
Yeah.
That's the first fundamental right of Americans.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing's going to change here until we first make the city safe.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about how that happens. How do you make a city safe when so many of its citizens are just completely at odds with the agency that polices them?
That's a political environment that's been created here. And I'm on record for years now talking about the fact that there's a social economic divide in this country that exists,
Mm-hmm.
which has been a narrative that's been created over a 400-year period. And putting on police body cams is not going to change that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a well-earned distrust that we've created in this country. And it's not just the police. It happens to be the police are the most forward element of a failed government system that is not serving the disenfranchised communities. And that's why this holistic approach has to be taken. But it starts with a difficult conversation about race that apparently nobody is willing to have. When I've had these conversations, I'm a big history buff. When I talk about the history of African Americans in this country, on the South and the West Side, people say to me, nobody who looks like you ever spoke to us like this.
I've seen videos of you doing those presentations to black audiences, and I've been very impressed. And I must say, it's very unusual, and especially for someone who's a high-ranking, in this case, highest-ranking police officer. So I understand that you understand these things.
We have to get everybody else to, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No.
But we have to get everybody else to understand how we got here. That's how we can figure out where we're going. And if you're going to fix a problem, you have to first acknowledge what the problem is. If there was not one police shooting in this city in 2016, there was still 4,300 people shot and 770 people murdered. That's simply unacceptable. Police-related shootings account for less than half of 1% of the shootings in this city. And you know, what's happening today, and I don't want to segue out of this, but it's the same topic. I've been saying the distrust that's been created in the disenfranchised communities in this country over the course of America's history are not going to turn around because we're wearing body cameras. From slavery to black codes to Jim Crow and segregation. Segregation was legalized in my lifetime. And the bottom line is, who was doing that enforcement? It was the white police officers. So it's not unusual that that distrust exists. It's a well-earned distrust. But we're not recognizing how we got there. The social economic divide, redlining, the way this city was created. So let's acknowledge that first. Let's figure out how we got here, and then we could figure out how we're going to move forward.
You are such an interesting guy, because it's unusual for someone in your position to be as aware of these issues and to articulate them the way you do. But your tenure as police commissioner was mixed, in my view. I mean, there were times when I was really proud of what you were doing, and I thought you did some great work. And then there were these dark times when things just looked like it was just standard old policing.
Well,
I can't understand. I've never been able to understand you. I've always had this kind of like interesting.
My wife sometimes says that.
I'm sure. Yeah. But what I guess I'm getting at here is that I have always kind of given you a little bit of credit for the fact that you were working in one of the most difficult situations imaginable, which is not the racism and the hatred and the violence and the shooting. It's working in City Hall, where City Hall is probably the most vicious place, that there can be. And so the question that arrives at your doorstep at this point is, to what degree did you feel while you were in your position that your policies were thwarted by the politics of the mayor's office? It must have happened on a regular basis.
Yes, it happened frequently. And I could give you a couple of stark examples, but the first thing that I want to say about this is, you can't solve decades-old problems in a 4-year election cycle.
Of course not.
But that's the expectation. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the DOJ reports, they go, when we were doing the NATO summit in 2012, you know what I had to deal with? People talking about the 1968 Democratic National Convention.
Right.
It's not the young men and women of the Chicago Police Department who were executing the plan that was held up as the gold standard after NATO had not even been born. But that's the culture,
right.
And that's what the expectation was.
Right.
So that's what you're dealing with.
Those posters, my granddaddy club, whatever it was, my granddaddy did yours. I forget what the would be.
I was a little disappointed in that as a professional. Mm-hmm. But the bottom line is, that's a fact. I ran the department like a business. Mm-hmm. In policing now, we apply business management to policing, and that's where we're getting results. And during my tenure, I'd like to know about the dark moments, because we're dealing with life and death situations. And during my tenure, not only was crime down almost 40%, not only did we have back-to-back years of 50-year lows in the murder rate, but we did it by making less arrests, more gun arrests at the same time, because I am concerned about mass incarceration. I understand. I'm one of the few police leaders in the country who will say that our war on drugs has been a spectacular failure. It doesn't work. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, my thinking as to what actually constitutes a crime has changed. Okay, but before we get into that, I want you to realize that we had a 68% reduction in police-related shootings while I was there. 68% from the time I walked through the door till the time that I was terminated.
Excuse me, just one quick question. I really don't mean to interrupt. What were the numbers, though? I mean, 68% is impressive, but if it went from 20 to...
No, it went from, and I don't recall exactly, but it went from something like 100 to 20, or 100 to 30, or something like that.
Right. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
And you need to realize that the Chicago PD at least did, I don't know what the numbers say today, took more guns off the street than any city in the country. Mm-hmm. So you're getting into armed confrontations with criminals on a daily basis. And having done that a lot, I mean, I was a very active police officer. I would go on patrol out here. I was involved in 5 separate gun arrests while I was the superintendent. Armed confrontations with criminals, bad things are going to happen. Mm-hmm. So shootings were down, complaints against officers were down, arrests were down, crime was down. I mean, these are metrics that any police leader in the country would want to have. It was well on its way towards reform when the rug got pulled out from underneath us.
But at the same time, you really ramped up this what's referred to as stop and frisk, but the contact cards thing. You were doing
Terry
like
stops.
Terry stops. You were doing 400,000 or 500,000 a year, and from everything that's been that people have brought to this table to talk about, what we've always heard is that was just a colossal failure in the African American community, because people who are not troublemakers were just being stopped and interviewed for the fact that they had to fill out contact cards, and that there was a criticism that you really were just looking for numbers on that. You just wanted to get the numbers.
Patently false. As a matter of fact, do you know that I terminated a police commander because he went out and produced numbers? I did this.
You mean falsely, or?
Not falsely, but basically told his people, I want you to go out and do contact cards. Not do your job, which, by the way, I've never had anybody jump into the back of my car and say, hey, I've got a gun. I've had to get out of the car and go get it. And if you don't get out of the car, you're not going to get it. But what if I were to show you a 2-year analysis of crime? So when this issue hit CPD in 2013 and 2014.
Which issue is this?
The whole
Terry stops?
Terry stops.
Yeah.
I don't like to use that term that you use because it's a long story.
Stop and frisk.
Yeah.
Because it's racially.
It's not a program. It's the United States Supreme Court calls it Terry stops, and they said that we could stop people based upon articulable, reasonable suspicion.
Yeah.
Now, what creates that? What creates articulable, reasonable suspicion? It's experience, training, observation skills, and guess what? Crime data. Who, when, and where is crime being committed by? And we did a 2-year analysis in 2013 and 2014 that I'm willing to show anybody who wants to see it, that showed who we stopped, when we stopped, and where we stopped people was within a percentage point or two in every one of the 77 communities in this city, based upon victim identification of who, when, and where the offender and the crime happened.
Okay, but you were stopping like hundreds of thousands of. There were hundreds and thousands of stops a year, right?
Well, what's the right number? Is
Well,
it
I
10,
don't know,
or is it,
but
or is it
I
100
mean,
million? I don't know.
Within
But
5 years, you're like half the population of the city.
Here's what people don't understand. The Supreme Court said articulable, reasonable suspicion. If the demographic of who, when, and where we're stopping people matches up precisely with crime data, we're in a pretty good place in my book. Now, what people don't understand is that the ACLU and the Department of Justice have adopted a philosophy that it should match the population demographic. Now think about Englewood, which is 98% African American. Should we be stopping 32% white folks there? First of all, what impact would it have on crime when 100% over that 2-year period of the offender description for murder was African American? It doesn't make sense. And that's probably the easiest way to describe it. That's the easiest way to describe it. There's disproportionalities that exist in crime that are not being recognized, and we're blaming the police. This is the social economic divide. Nothing could be more clear to me than where, when, and who is committing crime. But we're not recognizing that. We're saying the police are not doing their job. The Supreme Court says this, the ACLU says that. If we went to the Supreme Court and said that we were using population demographics for our stop data, they would say it was unconstitutional. But that's not the standard we're being held to. This has to be addressed. That's the social economic divide that nobody's talking about.
At the same time, though, well, interestingly enough, you're trying to transition from being a top cop to being a mayor, to being a politician. So
Please don't use that word. Public servant.
You are intending to be a politician, because you have to be a politician if you want to be the mayor.
I'm not
sorry.
intending to be a politician.
But nevertheless, you have opted to fly the coop over into the world of politics. And I would argue that as a police commander, as a police boss, you're also a politician. You live with one leg in law enforcement and the other leg in the political world all the time. You must know that.
The politics that policing gets dragged into are exactly what we're seeing, and that's why Chicago's failing right now.
And I have to say, I didn't intend to go this far down into this, that there were so many, not so many, but there were times when I was just disappointed in you politically, not as a professional, but politically, that I thought that you and, well, the mayor, that's another whole story, but that when we saw what happened with LaQuan McDonald and the battle over what to do with the video and when do you release video, and what we're seeing today in the Harith Augustus situation, which of course you have nothing to do with, it just feels to me that there is a kind of a tone-deaf situation with our politics, that we're not able to acknowledge how sensitive and how explosive the racial element is in Chicago.
I think we're in agreement.
Okay.
We are absolutely in agreement. And that's why I talk about complaints against our officers being down at the same time. That's why I talk about mass incarceration. That's why I talk about the social economic divide that's not being recognized. That's why I talk about compassion in government, which we're not seeing today. There is a tone deaf, absolutely. And we're tone deaf for not paying attention to our history that got us to this point. And just to put a point on it, I've been saying for years, wearing body cameras is not going to change 400 years of mistrust. That's exactly what we're seeing today. We're seeing a video of a man with a gun who grabs a gun, gets shot, and now we have a problem. Now this is exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Because we're taking the wrong medicine for what ails us. If we keep pointing at the police as the problem, we're still going to have this problem in 10 years because we're not talking about how we got here and the history in this country.
You're going to have to deal with this when you're mayor.
Absolutely.
And this is going to be, you may think when you get up in the morning and go to work that you're going to be dealing with this, this, and this, and this, but by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you're back to dealing with race and violence and policing. Because
nobody's dealing with it.
It's the biggest deal.
But nobody's dealing with it.
Yeah.
We're putting our head in the sand. And we're flip-flopping.
Okay, well then
and by the way, if you were disappointed in me for calling it like it is, I apologize.
Oh, no, that's not what I said.
Okay.
That's not what I said.
No, that's what I heard. Remember, you can only control what you say.
You can only say, that's right. This is going wildly off the tracks. I was not intending to do any of this. I assure you, we were going to be talking about, look at this, I got 3 pages of stuff here. Crime, taxes, the economy.
All related.
It is all related, you're right. It is all one and the same thing. Yeah. And so what happens is, even though we're talking about, Amazon and the $2.5 billion that we want to give Amazon to bring 200 or 25,000 or whatever it is, 50,000 people who are going to earn a lot of money and gentrify entire neighborhoods.
Who are those people?
Don't
Probably
know.
from the suburbs, because they're not going to be able to live downtown.
Right. No,
that's not helping us.
And none of the people that we've been talking about who are complaining about their policing are going to get any of those Amazon jobs either.
Right.
So while we're talking about that, at the same time, we're seeing with this Augustus shooting that the thread is so thin, and it takes nothing for us to just go right back to the ramparts, and we're all split up again. Explain to me, if you would please, and maybe this is a training issue. I've never understood, and I've really never been able to talk to anyone at your level. When and how is it appropriate for a police officer to shoot someone who is moving away from them?
Complicated scenario.
I know.
Here's the short story. I can show you a video of a police officer chasing somebody with a gun who shoots him while he's running.
Who shoots back at the cop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's first of all. So what the legal definition goes like this: if the escape of that person outweighs the danger of the immediate situation, that's the answer in the crime codes across the country. So, when the LaQuan McDonald shooting occurred and the video was released, go back and look at what I said. the officer is going to have to explain his actions. It's
You
not
did
up
say
to
that.
me. It's not up to you. Nobody can explain them except for him what was in his mind when that occurred. And it's the same situation in any shooting that a police officer is in. So, look, I made so many gun arrests in my police career. I can't even put a number on it. It's probably 800 to 1,000 over 35 years. They used to joke that my initials stood for gun magnet when I was a police officer. I never once fired my weapon. Once I thought I did, and I didn't even know. And it turns out this was back in the days of revolvers, and I had actually started pulling the trigger and let it go because as I was training on the target, suddenly I realized there was a person sitting on the parked car with their back to me. Went up in the air, I thought it was the recoil of the weapon. I would have shot this guy right in the head. That would have been a problem.
Yeah, yeah.
So different people react to stress in different fashions.
The last thing in the world I want to do is put you in a position of commenting on what's happening with the police department today. You have nothing to do with it, but there still are lessons that I don't think we're learning. The police department released body cam video, but it was edited, and there was no audio. And all it did was just fuel more and more questions about what happened in the few seconds before or after the video. There were apparently a number of police officers there. It looks like there might have been a dozen or 10 police officers at the time in that area, right?
Okay. I saw the vehicle, and I saw 3 officers on foot. I don't.
Oh, okay. Well, I thought I had seen something. Maybe I'm confusing it with the aftermath, but
yeah, probably.
It looked like, well, anyway, my point is still the same, that there are numerous police officers involved, and so therefore there are numerous perspectives that the cameras can be shot at. If you're going to go if you're going to just release video, then why not release all of the video, or at least release the video that answers the big questions that people are asking? Because you read the columns, you read Mary Mitchell, you read like everybody else does. The guy appeared to have a valid FOID card. He may not have had a carry card, but he had a FOID card.
Is that confirmed? Because I'm hearing both ways,
well,
and I don't know what's true.
Eddie Johnson said he did.
He did? Okay. I didn't know.
All right, forgive me if I'm wrong about that, but I believe he did.
Okay.
So we have this really difficult situation where things they escalate so quickly,
right.
And the public don't really know whether there's no evidence that he reached for his gun. So
I'm sorry, but that's what I saw in that video. He very clearly put his hand on that gun. Very clearly from what I saw.
Okay. Well, you're the professional and I'm not.
Yeah, but let me
to me it looked like he was running away and the gun belt started falling and he tried to grab but we're all.
Here's what I want to say about that. If he's in possession of a legal firearm, comply, because we're all in a dangerous situation because there's a lot of guns at stake.
Right.
I'm not a police officer. I was a police officer for 35 years.
Yeah.
And anytime I got stopped on a vehicle stop or interacted with a police officer, I said, I'm on the job, I have a weapon, right? Which is, that's cop lingo, obviously.
Yeah.
But it starts with compliance. If that young man had said, I have a firearm, I have a FOID card, it would have been an entirely different situation.
But he apparently tried to show his FOID card, right?
Why did he push the officers away?
We don't know.
You weren't
This
there,
is
I wasn't there.
This is a crazy conversation.
And it's based
We're
upon a
wasting
very
time.
small snippet of what we saw.
Yeah. But that raises the question of I just don't understand the logic of releasing an edited piece of videotape. All it does is it just fuels the fires more.
I can't answer it. I'm happy that they released it as quickly as
So
they
am
did.
I, but
I also want to be clear that is a new policy.
Yeah.
That's a new policy across the country.
Right.
And
And LaQuan McDonald really basically triggered that, right?
Well, there were other shootings that did the same thing, but at the time, the policy was don't release video, evidence. We don't release evidence in a murder case, right? Why would we release evidence in a police shooting investigation if it's not completed?
So where are you on that
That
today?
was the policy.
Are you opposed to that? Would you change that policy?
Well, now that we've taken this leap, we might as well just keep going and see what happens. At the time,
don't you think in a broader sense that it's probably good for the body politic?
yeah,
I mean, but it's not a bad thing.
But I don't understand why it wasn't good in this case. If we're going to release video, and they did release video very quickly, then we're not releasing enough video.
Well,
it's like,
there's this
it's a good start.
We're getting there. We're moving. We're making progress. This would be a place where I'd be optimistic. I would say we are making some progress.
Yeah.
But there is this whole mistrust about not having audio, and you know about all that stuff.
Yeah. Well, if you
police officers didn't want to use the audio, and
if you look at the policies, it has to do with the officer turning on the audio. And there was somebody on TV from the company that supplies it talking about the policy. And the audio was not turned on until after the actual shooting occurred. And, those officers will have to explain that. I can't,
I know.
we're
I'm not trying to hold you accountable
we're
for it, but,
second-guessing and armchair quarterbacking here, which we could do all day.
So now what do you want to do? The whole show is just completely out of control. Can we talk about a couple of other issues?
Whatever you like, kid. We'll talk about the All-Star game tonight. I'll do that too. Do you believe that Mayor Emanuel has stabilized the pension funds? No, absolutely not.
Okay.
But by the way, that's a much more complicated situation dealing with Springfield too.
Yeah.
So that's a big problem that has to be addressed, and that's going to be peeling away the onion. As far as the finances of the city are concerned, I've said over and over again, we're not going to fix it in a 4-year cycle. We may not fix it in an 8-year cycle. We need a much longer-term plan for finances of the city and digging us out. The problem is 4-year cycles in politics. Will that fly? I don't know, but that's the way I'm going to handle it, because I'm not going to lie to people and say I'm going to fix it in a 4-year cycle. Can't happen.
All right, screw this issues stuff. I want to know something else. I really have always just been obsessed with what it would be like to be you or, school superintendent and working with Rahm Emanuel. Were there times when you thought you walked out of a meeting with something very clear, that you knew what was going to happen, and then you just had the rug pulled out from under you? I bring this up because my sense of it is that that's what happened to Eddie Johnson on the Dan Ryan thing. I mean, I felt like that poor guy was just like dragged all over the place. He had said he was in favor of this, and then suddenly he was in favor of something else because the mayor changed his mind. Did that happen to you?
I don't remember specifically that happening, and I'd have to think a little longer on it, because it was a very 4.5 years at that level is a very intense 4.5 years. I do remember going to loggerheads over and over again, sometimes with the mayor, in meetings with his staff, and it was just unprofessional. And I had to talk him down over and over again and explain why I was doing what I was doing. That was more the dynamic. He did rant and rave at me a lot. Actually called me into his office on Easter Sunday one time to scream at me.
Actually physically into the office?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I was on my way to my in-laws' house up in Park Ridge with my wife. I dropped her off and came back down, and then went back up, which took about 5 hours, obviously, with the traffic. And phone calls over and over again, whether or not something had happened or nothing had happened. I used to go on patrol a lot, and I can only do it on Friday and Saturday nights when I was off, right? And sometimes I'd get home at like 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'd text the mayor and I'd say, really quiet night, nothing happened. And then I'd get a 6 a.m. phone call for no reason. So nothing happened? Yeah, nothing happened. You saw I sent you that at 4 a.m. Could I sleep more than 2 hours? So it's his right as a boss to manage any which way he wants. That's not my style. I think it's more important. You want to hear, here's my style in a nutshell. There's a fellow named Chesty Puller, who was a big Marine. He went from buck private to lieutenant general. 5 Navy crosses during World War II in Korea. One day he's walking across Camp Pendleton in San Diego, California, and he sees this young buck private saluting a lieutenant over and over again. And he says, Lieutenant, what's going on here? And the lieutenant turns and says, Colonel, sir, this private didn't salute me, so I'm making him salute me 100 times so he learns his lesson. And Puller's response, well, that's wonderful, Lieutenant, but of course you realize that by military law or rules and regulations, every salute must be returned. And he made the lieutenant stand there and salute the private 100 times. There's no more valuable asset than we have than the worker bees, than the people who are out there doing the job. And you can't lead from the top, you have to lead from the front. And I'm very proud of the fact that that's my reputation. I was always out there with the troops, working with them, correcting them when they did something wrong, which I saw happen a lot. And that has to do with supervision. Supervision and leadership at the same time. We need that in city government.
We hear very often from police officers who say, I've just had it. It's like I feel like I'm under attack all the time, and I'm not going to get out of the car unless I need to, and basically I'm just going to sit here and wait for my pension to kick in because it's not worth it for me to go out there and put my body on the line for this situation. Do you think that that's a widespread thing?
Well, that's what they tell me. I mean, every police officer that I see basically says the same things. They say, you know, we need you back. And they say that...
But wasn't that happening while you were in charge too?
To a degree. You know, there's always the civil servant who's going to do the minimum and collect their paycheck. But by and large, we had a department that was dynamic and moving forward over the course of 4.5 years. And people would ask me constantly, how long do you think it's going to take to institutionalize this? And I said, probably another 2 years. So we're looking at 6 or 7 years. I said, unless we revert going right back to politics rather than performance-based organization, which is what I tried to create. And that's what I tried to create wherever I went. And that's what needs to happen with city government. We need to run it like a business, because if anybody ran their business the way that City Hall is run, they'd be out of business in a heartbeat.
We've just chewed up an hour of your time.
That's all?
Yeah, that's all. Yeah, and I know you need to get back out on the campaign trail, so we'll let you go. It's really fascinating to talk to you. You're an interesting guy, and I'm really glad that you stopped by.
My pleasure.
And maybe we'll do it again if we can fit into your schedule sometime, because we got many more things to talk about.
I was going to say, we have a lot more to talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's quite a bit.
Hold on to your notes.
Okay. All right. Okay.
But
I wanted to ask you about Trump, but
that'll change like 5 times between now and the next time we speak.
It'll change by tomorrow.
Yeah.
Garry McCarthy, thank you very much for being here
pleasure,
on
Ken.
Chicago Newsroom today.
Thank you.
We've really enjoyed speaking with you. I'm Ken Davis, and you've been watching Chicago Newsroom here on CAN TV. You can watch all of our shows, all of our archive right here by going to this address that you see on the screen. And we'll be back next week. We're going to be talking about a lot of city politics on the show next week, and maybe even about the Uptown Theater. That'll be interesting too. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next week. Thanks to Dave Resnick for producing the show today. I'm Ken Davis. See you next week. Bye-bye.